Welcome to the 3Haunted podcast, where we bring you all things horror, supernatural, folklore, mythology, and all things that go bump in the night.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm your co-host, Kevin, K-Daddy from Dirty South, the ATL, Hotlanta, Georgia. I'm a post-production master, filmmaker, and horror nerd.
And I'm your co-host, John Thomas, ghost hunter, super smartass, and film lover extraordinaire.
Hey guys, this is your co-host Ashley, Gorilla Girl filmmaker, lunar goddess, and cinephile. What's up, ghouls and gals, and, well, all my lovely pets. In today's podcast, we're going to be talking about incubi, succubi, and sirens. Today, we also have a very special guest. Who do we have? Tune in and find out. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Cinematic, captivating, terrifying, and intense. Trap 2021 will return live May 21st through the 23rd. New categories, new prizes, and still no entry fee. Visit trapfilmfestival.com for more information.
All right. Welcome back. So, as we said before, we have a very, very special guest with us today. We have Michael Amidei with us today from World Poetry Night and the Michael Amidei Show. Welcome, Michael. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very, very well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for coming on today and talking with us. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about the Incubus.
I'm interested to see what I have to say about this too.
Who first guessed?
All right, guys, how are you doing? How are you guys doing? Kevin and John, how's everybody doing today?
I'm good.
I'm doing well, thanks.
Every
Go ahead,
time.
John.
I'm doing great. A little tired, working my butt off all week, but yeah, I'm doing good. Kevin,
I'm doing well, thank you. It's been a good week, just winding down and ready for the holidays. How are you, Ash?
I've got wine. I'm feeling fine.
Sorry, I meant to call you the Sucky Werewitch.
I am the Sucky Werewitch. All right, so let's get right into it. What do we know, guys? What do we know about what the incubi is? Let's start with the incubi.
Ooh, Incubi.
What do you know about it? Just what you read?
I know it's a badass band, that's for sure.
Aha.
Oh, Kevin.
What?
So I'll jump in here with this. So the incubi and succubi being the male and female gendered demons that are said to come and essentially sexually assault or seduce men and women while they sleep. There you go. There's the broad stroke of
Yes.
the whole thing.
Yes.
Unintended.
You can't say stroke during an incubi and succubi.
I absolutely can say stroke.
He did, and we got it, and it's great.
Say it and say it slowly.
So one thing was really interesting is, I'm one of those people who, grew up hearing about this stuff and always assigning, something at least being somewhat realistic about paranormal things. And then I went through a strong period of time where I was like, most of this can be assigned to mental illness or something, right? And it's interesting, if you actually look up, there are still many cases to this day of people claiming to be attacked by incubi and succubi. And they believe that it is some sort of a psychological thing. It can be treated, but there's a lot of cases. I mean, something I read said of 1,800 cases in the United States over 1 year.
Wow.
Of people who are and not happy about it. Like they're coming in real. I mean, because some people might be like, yeah, I'm really into this idea.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
but there's, right? I mean, there could be, but these are people who are actually in distress and seeking treatment because they don't know what to do. And I found that absolutely fascinating. Before doing research, I had no idea that this was still a thing, because I always just assumed it was an excuse that like priests and nuns were using. You know what I mean? Like, why did this nun end up pregnant? Well, damn incubi, like they just show up when you least expect it,
Yeah.
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 It's very much vampire. It's very much the same idea as a vampire
Right.
in many respects, right?
It is. Just to touch on something that I said about why didn't this person get pregnant or whatnot, I had come across that the incubus is between the two incubi and succubi, the incubus is the more fertile of the two. And there's been folklore stories and tales said that the incubus will create like half breeds and child within the world just to keep the lineage going.
Now, you know what's interesting? Almost all of the research I found and a lot of like the Christian stance on incubi and succubi is that they are actually infertile. They are not capable of offspring, which is why they don't mate together. What I found interesting is that, I mean, there's some pretty explicit ways that they're able to impregnate human females, but also what they do with the males. So the idea is that the incubi and succubi are actually one entity that are able to change their sexes. So they can go from male to female depending who they are visiting that evening. And so you'll find that it comes in the form of a succubi to a human male, takes in his progeny. Takes in his I don't even know what to call it, his semen, and will then go to a human female as an incubi and then use that to impregnate the human female that it visited. So it's actually able to switch biological sexes to get what it needs and then present it, into a human female and impregnate her that way. Now, even though it wasn't its initial, semen, it's still able to imprint, I guess, if you will, its supernatural abilities onto that and then create what you're talking about, like those changelings.
Yep.
I found that pretty interesting.
So it's almost like a supernatural turkey baster.
Oh,
Sorry.
Bad joke of the day so far.
I would have been a fan at that point. Like, come on. Just
it's in vitro for demons.
it is in vitro.
So thinking about this, like, and the reason I brought up vampirism as well, because it's really about the unwilling, someone having their life force in some way, shape, or form taken or manipulated in some way without permission, right? So essentially, deep down, this is really like a rape idea. And so really, at least as far as when you really get into it, right? And maybe it can be viewed through a slightly different frame depending on how you're looking at it. But in like the research I was looking at, and it goes back a long ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just a Christian thing. It goes back in all kinds of cultures.
There's something to it.
And you see a lot of writings from apparently in the Middle East where they refer to it instead of a demon, they refer to it as one of the jinn that they picture doing it. But it's fascinating when something shows up in every culture. There means there's something there at work, and it might just be some sort of archetypal thing, but there's a lot more to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do know, as someone who's had in the past the situation where you wake up but your body's still staying completely, motionless, and you feel like there's something sitting on your back or sitting on your chest.
Sleep paralysis.
So that's something that they have talked about a lot. And then, of course, the dreams can actually bleed into your waking life as well, which is very real. I actually had the experience of when I was undergoing cancer treatment as a kid, I was put into a coma for 30 days.
Oh, wow.
And because of an allergic reaction to chemotherapy. But when I woke up from the coma for about a week afterwards, the hallucinations bled into my actual everyday life.
That would be terrifying.
And it was really trippy. So I can imagine, I can sympathize with some of these people, whether they are imagining it or whether they're an actual thing. I'm not discussing that necessarily, but I could see how absolutely vivid that would be if you woke up with night terrors and it was just printing itself right there. It would be completely real to you.
Well, and realistically, there is an element of arousal here. It's not like you have completely unwilling victims. So a lot of these people report erotic dreams and erotic sensations. So to me, I wonder if some of these cases is almost a combination between this nocturnal arousal and, sex dreams and shame of having those.
Big time.
And so kind of I would never think of that on my own. So something else has to be influencing me into that. And so I kind of wonder, you have mixtures of sleep paralysis, you have mixtures of nighttime arousal and sex dreams. And, the guys have wet dreams and waking up oh no, how did that happen?
Especially if you're a priest and you're sleeping in a room with other priests.
And blaming that on something else. And to your point, I mean, it goes well past the Christianity and Catholicism. The earliest that they have recorded this concept, the notion of the first usage of that word was like back in Mesopotamia. Like that's pretty old.
Right. Gilgamesh.
Yeah. So it's just like this has been a concept that's been around for a really long time. It's just kind of taken on its own life form. And just as the cultures go, and I know we've talked about this before, is it like telephone where it kind of branches out and people have this explanation? Or to your point, are all these cultures explaining the same or similar things in a similar way? So maybe there's more to it than we give credit for.
Well, it seems like a really elemental idea too. I mean, there's certain ideas that seem to show up. I mean, one of the things I've been working on for a while now is I went back and started looking at the oldest stories we have on record and in the human race. And they're really crazy because they're these kind of fairy tales that sound like we know them, but a lot of them are so weird that they're not told now, right? But there's elements that just go through all of these other things that show up in our culture now. And I think there's just broad things in the subconscious of humans that have to work their way out in stories and in the way that we communicate with each other. And I feel like this is one of those ideas. And a point that you made, Ashley, earlier, which I think is pretty valuable, is that a lot of times these people might not be completely unwilling participants in this. One thing I found really interesting. So for a while, I had a production company back that I started when I was a teenager, and then decided in my early 20s, I wanted to kind of completely change my life. And I actually at one point went to go become a monk, but one of my goals was to actually become an exorcist, believe it or not. And so I actually got to meet with the head exorcist for the Archdiocese of Denver and got to talk with them a lot. And one of the things I found out was a common strange thread that runs through people who either think they have it and have manifested psychologically, or someone that they would actually ascribe as to really having it, which is very rare, is that they have to be really frightened of being possessed or almost obsessive with thinking about it, whether it's because they're scared of it or whatever. They're just really focused on this idea. And that seems to be a common theme across like people who either have the manifestation of it or it quote actually does happen to them. So I wonder if there's an element there, Ashley, also like it could, I mean, what a fantastic dark fantasy release from someone who's stuck in a very mundane position. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I also found it interesting for all of these different religions and non-religious groups that believe in it, but especially the religious groups, that they've created these rules around them. And it makes me wonder, like, who tried it that they know it doesn't work? For example, everybody seems to be in alignment with that. Like Incubi and Succubi do not respond to religious icons, like using a cross and holy water and stuff like that on them doesn't work. And it's just like, how do you know that if you were asleep when it happened? And one group even put together, is it the Malleus Maleficarum, 5 ways to overcome the attacks of Incubi and Succubi. And it's, doing sacramental confessions, the sign of the cross, moving a person from one location to another, like get them out of that room, and then excommunication or an exorcism of that entity. And for me, it's just like, how do they know these things don't work? Like, is it, we tried the cross, we put the cross, then we made them wear it before they went to bed. They still had a naughty dream, so let's try the next one. Or are people waking up during those instances and trying to fight them with crosses and holy Bibles? And like, how do they know what works and doesn't work? Because I know we've talked about that before, even like with the skinwalkers, when they talk about, this is how you kill one. Like, how do you know that? Did you actually kill one? What did you kill? I don't know.
Well, right. I mean, that's really an interesting point as well. And I think, I remember reading somewhere, and this was a long time ago, that monks used to wrap rosaries around their testicles and their genitals before going to bed to prevent succubi from coming to attack them.
Wow.
Yeah, which sounds very uncomfortable to me.
Yes.
Talk about a Hail Mary.
2
for 2. Sorry.
There's no origin story for Incubi. Like, I always want to know, when did it pop up and where did it come from? And there's no origin story for Incubi. We know when it kind of started to be discussed. But they have a total origin story for the succubi. Like, it's associated with Lilith.
Right.
And she's the first succubus, and she gave way to the rise of the demons. She's like the origin of demons. And so for me, where's the incubi come in? Did they stem from Lilith? Are they something different? Because I know with her, she had to copulate with an archangel to breed demons. But what about the incubi?
So I don't know. I mean, I did kind of look into the Lilith thing as well. And this is really this whole conversation is really a conversation around sexuality and shame. First of all,
Mm-hmm.
like let's just get that out right away. So
Absolutely.
I think what we're looking at, first of all, in an archetypal story, is the way that sexuality was seen as very dark, right? And it had to be demonic for you to be having. Like, can you imagine in a very Christian-controlled, medieval era, sleeping in the same room as your husband, and you start moaning while you're dreaming, and like you're obviously having a sex dream, and your husband's gonna be like, "What the fuck is going on?" Right? Well, okay, well, we need some mythology to explain this, right? Or like, I think the human sexual nature is really, the more we repress it, and we know this is a psychological thing too, the more we repress something, the more it will find a way to express itself, and a lot of times it can do that very negatively.
Mhm.
So I think that there's a lot to that, and it's kind of like the shadow savage version of our human sexuality, kind of put in a story. I think Lilith is also a great example of that. Like the way I've seen Lilith, and I've always heard this story told, was it's kind of like she was meant to be under Adam's dominion,
Mm-hmm.
and she wouldn't be, and she was like, "Screw this! This archangel's way more interesting. I'm going to go hang out with him anyway," right? And then because of that, she had to be demonic now. She had to. Well, first of all, and maybe she did, but I'm not necessarily buying that she is demonic because she just chose not to like be submissive to her husband. To me, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Am I going down a weird road on that, or what do you think?
During that time, like if you didn't fall into place or you didn't follow like the strict rules, especially of the church,
Right.
like it was shame on you, and let's paint this whole world around that to make you basically the bad guy and make you look down upon from your peers, from your
Well, and the societal ostracization, that being such a powerful deterrent, but also like framing someone who doesn't immediately submit to their husband as demonic. And then of course, she's responsible to the rise of demons because I mean that's the natural outcome of this. It's one or the other. Like, wait a second.
I think it depends on the origin story you ascribe to with Lilith.
Fair enough.
Because
Yeah.
everybody knows I have a soft spot for Lilith because old girl didn't want to be obedient and mindless. But from my understanding, it seems like a lot of the origin stories, it wasn't so much she said no and walked away. It was she said no and they kicked her out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And God's like, let's try again. Here's another version 2.0. Let's see if this one behaves. In my opinion, this is me projecting, but like that's painful.
Oh,
Just
horrible.
because you're like, no, I don't want to be obedient. I'm pushed out. I can't be with my original husband. And I see this other chick come along and it's like, well, this one's the better version, the upgraded version who will listen. And so from my understanding in her origin story, she's, at least in some of them, she is hurt. She's angry. She's upset. She's angry at God for just like being in line with that. She's angry at Adam for being like, yep, good without you. I need model version 2.0.
Yeah, what's she supposed to do?
Yeah, and she's just cast out.
Lilith's supposed to just fuck off. Just
Yeah,
fuck off,
and
Lilith.
from my,
You're out.
but this is where I find exactly where she's like, I almost feel like she was preyed upon. That at least in the stories I've read, Samael actually approaches her and is just like, hey, I can't believe they did this to you. And then even he ditched her. Like they had a thing going and he ditched her for some other people. And so she is angry. And here we go, rise of the demons. So she's punishing men. But I don't know if that's a warning story for women. Like if you're not obedient, this is what happens to you. They're going to find someone who will be.
Yeah,
if you aren't. So I almost feel like it's a moral of the story that was used to keep women in their place.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because it gives Lilith a bad shake. Like you were the first wife. You just didn't want to be a mindless, obedient servant. And then you got kicked out and then you got betrayed by an archangel. So she's a little mad. Does it surprise you? She seduces and takes souls.
Well, archangels, you can't cage them. They're a bird that needs to fly free.
Oh my
There we
gosh.
go. Look, another bad joke. Kevin, he's got you beat now.
Well, I didn't even think about the flying joke, but yeah, there we go. But
They're a bird that needs to fly free.
no, I think you've got a really good point there, and also like as you were explaining that, I was thinking like, how has Darren Aronofsky not made this movie yet? I expect this to happen anytime.
2021, come on.
Well, and let's not forget, she was given the Garden of Eden too, but it was under the precipice of she has to be obedient to Adam. So when she's kicked out for not being obedient, what's outside of Eden? It's like barren wasteland.
Mhm.
So if you're obedient, you get the world handed to you. But if you aren't obedient, well, out you go into nothing and desolation.
And
So
technically,
it's rude.
Lilith was the first person to ever be fired from a job. No.
She got the pink slip.
She got the pink slip. But then again, this also gives a whole new idea to when Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden and they get sent out. And not only is the barren wasteland out there, but also
So
Adam's ex
Lilith.
is hanging out there. And and she's got a new boyfriend. And
She's like, what up, bitch? Like,
She's like, how's it feel? Doesn't it make you wonder, though? We really don't hear much about Adam afterwards. We hear about his line. We hear about like what happens in the different stories afterwards. But do you ever wonder if Lilith's like, well, I'm succubus status now, and kind of sneaking into Adam's dreams and getting that payback?
Maybe so. Yeah.
I can see that happening. Yeah.
There's a whole lot, like if you really notice in the Bible, there's very few stories of female sexual revenge. And we know that shit happens all the time. Like, we know that was a thing. That was purposely not kept in the Bible because we know that had a lot to do with things.
Yes.
Well, okay, so we're talking about Lilith being one of the origins of the situation, but at the same time, depending on how you look at the story of Genesis and surrounding Genesis, right? Whether you look at that as like a thing, if you look at it as some version of historical, or you look at it as a metaphorical telling of the creation of the world. Either way, we literally still have people who are having these cases, and they might not even know that it exists first. So I think that's another side of it, right? They might not know that this is an actual thing. They could, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're obsessed with it ahead of time. So I don't know. What do we do? What do we attribute to that? What do we believe? So it's really not about facts. It's not about empirical data. But what do we believe about? Is there really something coming and visiting these people on a psychic level? If so, is it other people? Is it kind of like an astral projection kind of thing, which is also very possible? Or is it something that we're imagining? What does everybody think?
I think it's in everything. I think there's a lot of things. I think it's case by case. So I think that there are instances of maybe people being assaulted in their sleep. I think there are probably instances where people are in a very highly oppressive, repressive scenario, whether it be by their religion or their community, where they are so feared into sexuality that maybe they mix it. When you're asleep, your brain is sending off images and all sorts of things, and your subconscious speaks out to you more so than if you're awake. So maybe their brain puts all those things together. It's a correlation that's been created. Their sexuality is evil. So of course their brain is manifesting that.
Right.
When they're feeling aroused, they're experiencing evil literally in their sleep.
Right.
Shame culture.
But the shame culture has a really definite effect that if you're asleep, your brain may promote that and, keep that going. Now, the things I find interesting when it comes to are they real is that there are people with cases where they wake up with scratches on them and bruises, and people try to explain that away. Well, scientists are just like, hey, well, your brain can cause it. I'm like, really? Your brain can work that hard that you wake up with scratches all down your back?
Which, so here's the thing. They do say that they think that is possible. That being said, one thing I will applaud psychiatry for is starting to accept the idea of demonic possession as a potential psychological condition. It's actually in the DSM-5, and that they actually look at cases like this. And one of the things I looked in the case study of the 1,800 cases in the United States in 1 year was talking about how in almost every case they would always do, brain scans and things like that to try to find abnormalities or try to rule out schizophrenia and all of this stuff. And in most of those cases, totally ruled out. There was no abnormalities in the brain. There was no sign of any psychological disease. So a lot of the normal things that they would use to diagnose something like that were not there. So this is why it's its own kind of case, its own thing.
Mhm.
I found that really interesting.
Right. And when I was doing some studying on this, I read that a lot of people who had been raped actually experienced stuff like this, like the sleep paralysis, and thinking that it's one of the two actually doing something to them as well, which is, I don't know, I found that interesting.
So they found sleep paralysis after the fact, or
Well, it was after, well, it was more the like having the dreams of the incubi or succubi, whatever, and waking up and then having like the actual sleep paralysis. It was after being raped
Wow.
one or more times. But yeah, I just found that interesting. It was weird.
That's a really fascinating. I mean, because you think about the protections. Our dream world is such a fascinating world. And I mean, you're talking to someone who's like obsessed with Carl Jung and like all the archetypal stuff there.
Mhm.
And I mean, our dream world is really such a fascinating place.
Right.
And who's to say? Like one of the things that you got to really realize too is that like we're the ones who say that dreams are real or not real, right? Like in my mind, even if you have a dream and it's not something that is in your physical waking reality, as far as you know, how is that still not real? In a way, it's absolutely real.
Well, it depends on what spirituality you ascribe to, too, because if you're in a little bit more of the Eastern culture, your perception is your reality. That is reality. Everything we perceive is the reality that we've constructed. So if it's something we perceive, it's not real. And that can be taken from a psychological perspective, but oftentimes it goes deeper than that. So it's literally everything is not real. What we have constructed the world around us is based on just our perception.
Yeah.
So if you're kind of along those lines of thought, I mean, you could say in that line of thought that this is real. For those people, it is reality, because whether it's a perception or not, perception is reality.
Well, I definitely agree with that. I think the other thing that I really found fascinating too was, like I would immediately sit there and say, okay, if it depends on what religion you subscribe to, sure. So we go to like Hinduism, right? And you got the concept of Maya and it's the illusion of the world and all that. But then if you go look at Christianity and then you follow it all the way back, and then of course, you jump into Judaism and you follow that back, and then you get to Kabbalah and the Sephirot, and then you suddenly realize, oh, it's all projection and illusion again.
Mhm.
Okay, let's go. And the farther you keep going back, you suddenly realize like it's actually all this. Like
It's all illusion.
it all goes back to this is all bullshit. Everything's bullshit. That's except for Scientology, and that's the truth.
Oh my goodness.
Because I don't want Scientologists to be pissed off at me. There we go.
The headquarters is literally 15 minutes from my apartment.
All right. Well, if they come and ask you any questions about me, just give me a glowing report, okay?
Right?
I don't want to piss them off.
Here's the thing, though. A lot of psychologists, and there's been studies done on this. I'm sure you're aware of this, Michael, because you said you've experienced sleep paralysis, is that I've been experiencing it since I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And it used to be, I would experience it almost every night. And then it became like maybe a few times a month. And now I experience it only if I'm sick, which kind of tells you it's probably something related to the chemistry within my brain, right? Where I notice I'm getting sick if sleep paralysis occurs. It's usually a telltale sign for me that I'm coming down with something, because now it only tends to manifest when I'm ill. So with that said, though, I want to believe with all my might that it's just a chemical something. It's a scientific non-manifestation of something external to me. It's all coming from within me. But I have had instances, and this is what makes me uncomfortable with a lot of scenarios in my life, whether it be ghost, like metaphysical, supernatural, is when other people experience it along with me. Because then it's like, uh-oh, it's not just in my head.
Right. How are we both experiencing this? Like, holy shit. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when we talk about sleep paralysis and Incubi and Succubi, I mean, I've not had an external person experience an Incubi or Succubi with me, but because I am the Succubi. But I have experiences where I have been in sleep paralysis, and I've learned to trick myself into waking up out of it all the way. Over time, I've taught myself some things to do, even in that moment, to completely snap out of it. But there have been instances where I'm working on doing that while I'm, in that in-between state, and whatever I'm hearing or seeing in that moment becomes so unbearably loud to me, somebody else hears it in the house and they come into the room. Like, what is going on in here? And I'm just laying there, I can't move. It's just not coming from me. And then it's like, oh, you heard that too. Oh shit. Now I don't know. Now I'm extra scared. Before I've taught myself, like, it's a thing that's, in my head and not really out there. And then someone else experiences it and it's like, oh man, you heard that?
Take that like one step further, like go back hundreds of years before the internet and before, like, I know we've talked about this before with like skinwalkers and other folklore. It's like before traveling was so easy and before communication was so easy, you could have similar stories popping up on other sides of the world and experiencing very similar things, calling it maybe something different. But
I think there's so many explanations, and it's easy, of course, to want to explain it away with something psychological. And I'm one of those people who believes that supernatural isn't a thing, that it's all just natural that we haven't understood yet. You know what I mean? It's paranormal is actually normal. We just don't understand it. So I guess that's kind of how I get there. I could say that, but then there's literally footage of a bunch of people praying outside of this house in like Georgia, and suddenly the sun starts going in and out, and you see people responding to it, and then it starts raining rose petals. And that's real footage.
Right.
There was also a thing in, was it 1995, as far as I remember, where Hindi statues in temples across the world were drinking milk for several days. Like, you would hold up a spoon of milk and it would disappear into the statues.
oh, wow.
I remember that. Yeah.
Like, these are actual things, right? So we're kind of left with this thing, like, either there's something really crazy, let's just assume we just don't know. I guess that's a big thing that we should say, first of all. But second of all,
We just don't know.
is it that there's something spiritual happening there, or is this a gigantic co-creation that we are putting together? Is this a game simulation? This is just meant to screw with us? Like, let's throw this and then see what happens. We don't know necessarily what that is. One of the things that I eventually came to as a creative person, as a writer or whatever, and I started thinking about, like, well, what you believe really matters, right? And I also believe that what your who your enemies are really defines you, right? Choose who your enemies are. And one of the things I eventually realized was, I think I'm just going to believe in everything and be beholden to nothing. So why not just, I'm not going to be gullible. Like, I'll actually use my mind. You know what I mean? I can tell when someone's trying to run a con thing. Like, I'm pretty good at that. However, why not? Why couldn't there be jinn? Why couldn't there be, you know what I mean? And by the way, I had a very long discussion, because they love those, with a rabbi that was visiting from Israel at one point. And he told me, we were talking about God, and
Was there a priest there too?
no, but I had lots of conversations with them too.
Sorry, I
You had to ask. Why not?
couldn't.
But one of the things I brought up was the only God thing. And the rabbi goes, oh, no. He said, I am the Lord, your God. He never said he was the only God. And I was like, this changes things. But this was, that was a statement, and that really stuck with me. So I'm just bringing that up, saying I guess I'm admitting to a state of confusion and not knowing, but also saying, I guess maybe the way I deal with the not knowing is by saying, let's be open to these ideas. Let's realize that our psychology maybe has a huge part of that. Maybe the way we co-create things in the way that the Maya or the false world that appears real responds to us. Maybe we are the gods creating this too. Maybe we want that experience. And that's why maybe all those people really wanted a sign, and boom, here comes a manifestation of that sign. Maybe that's how that happens.
It's one hell of a spell.
One hell of a spell, exactly. Yeah.
I think the best way I ever heard it explained to me, or not explained, but described, someone's description of it, and it resonated with me and I liked it, is that a comic book, for example, is 2D. So people in the comic book, let's say hypothetically, if they had this sense, being sentient beings, can't imagine what a 3D world is like. They can kind of have an idea there is a 3D world, but they don't really know what it's like. And then you have people in the 3D world who can look down at the comic book and say, okay, I get that. I can see what's going on in the comic book, and also understand their 3D world. But then when it comes up to the next part, the 4D, they can't understand the world above them. They understand there's some things that may be 4D, but they can't quite grasp it. And sometimes I wonder if these metaphysical, supernatural things are just existing on that level above us. So that level can grasp us and everything below it, the 3D, the 2D, but not what's above. So for us, maybe that's where the incubi, the succubi, the demons, the God, everything like that maybe exists on the level just above us, or maybe 3 levels above us that we don't grasp and we may never grasp. Or maybe it's to your point, where it's like this co-creation where we're manifesting all of this around us. And some people are just able to manifest it more so because they believe in it and want it to happen so much. It's rippling out that energy.
That's a really good point. And yeah, I mean, I can't help but think, hearing you talk about that, think about how, we're only able to see what percentage of the spectrum of light, right? There's so much we can't perceive in the first place. And also reminds me of dark matter. Like, it's really hard for us to actually consider dark matter, like really understand it. We have to kind of do these mental tricks to get ourselves to really like envision that idea. So I was learning a bit about the tribe, the Teutonic tribe in what is now Germany, when the Romans came across them, right? And they were like 250,000 people and were just laying waste to these Roman legions that were up there. So finally, Marius Gracchus goes up and he goes and he fights them. And the first skirmish is written about by Plutarch. And one of the things he said was the Romans came and they were fighting the Ambros, which were an ally of theirs. And they had defeated them to the point where the Ambrose men turn and ran. So the Romans are pursuing them. They go up over the hill, and the first thing they see is all of the women of the Ambrose standing there dressed in black. And the first thing the women do is they kill the men who are running away. Then they attack the Romans, and they're literally like just grabbing their swords with their bare hands to stop them and pulling their shields away and stuff. The Romans survive and do it, but the women's job was to kill the deserters, kill the children, and kill themselves, because no one's going to be a slave. And that was part of that culture. And I thought, that is so intense. But yet I can't help but feel some sort of a connection between that and Lilith and that and the idea of succubi. And I don't know why, but it feels like there's some sort of a connection there.
Well, succubi is sexual empowerment. It's a woman taking charge of the sexual interaction, the outcome, and it's a taking. So often, like, even what's the standard sexual position? It's missionary. The woman is submissive and on the bottom, she is receiving. But in a lot of these succubi encounters and experiences that they relate, these succubi are taking charge of the experience and the encounter. They are in charge every way through. They are not submissive. They are taking.
Right.
And they're taking charge. And I think that is a really strong representation of this idea as a sexuality by a female is demonic. Like, it is being demonized. That a woman that is in charge and intense, that's demonic. That can't be real, because a woman would not be taking charge, right? It's demonic. So if your girl hopped on top, she's probably a demon.
So let me ask the guys in this podcast, because I'm interested. Were you, even if it wasn't said directly, just culturally, were you raised when you were growing up to believe that women were not interested in sex, like when you were younger?
Culturally, yes. There's always the jokes of, sex is always on the guy's mind and women don't just want to talk. And like growing up, sexuality has always been skewed one way. And I feel like for me growing up, though, it was a little bit different because I grew up in mostly a house full of women. And so like I feel like a lot of the misogynistic aspects of that were pulled away.
Good.
But culturally, and from what you see in the movies and what you see on TV and pop culture, and it definitely influenced that. And going back to the shame culture, like I grew up in a very Catholic household, and my parents never condemned sex, but going to church and going through like First Communion, and like that was drilled in that sex was bad, and like it's for reproductive purposes only, and only between a married couple.
I remember, at least for me, and John, I don't know about you, so I want to ask you for sure, because maybe you've had a different experience, but I remember being utterly shocked at the age of 13 to find out that women actually really wanted to have sex as well. I was like, wait, I thought that was a thing we had to convince them to do. Like, you know what I mean? It was just, I just remember being completely blown away by that. And then but I also think a lot of women are kind of taught, depending on how you're you're taught that this should not be a thing that you do. Like, this is really only if you're married, only if, all that. Fair. Like, I'm not here to like knock anybody's beliefs on that necessarily, but I think this is at the root of the conversation here. So John, what did you have an experience similar to what Kevin and I are talking about, or do you think it's something else?
No, I actually did. Obviously growing up and hanging out with, your friends and everything there, most of my friends were guys. So of course, being a teenager, being horny little teenagers, guys only think about it, none of the girls. My family, one half of it was Catholic. So, it was definitely the don't have sex before marriage, all that. And yet, my grandma had like 9 kids. I'm like, wow. So you obviously like it a little bit or something because you have 9 kids. So, hey, but no, most of my family, I was raised by women as well, so I can agree with Kevin on that as well. So pretty much the same thing for me.
Yeah, that's so. It reminds me of the joke where it's like a tip is, it's not sex before marriage if you don't get married. Hey, anyway, I remember because like I became like very sexual very early on in life, almost like I would almost say too early. But it was a point where I remember going through confirmation at like 15 years old or something like that, and them doing this whole thing, and I'm like, I don't really buy this. It's like I've been there, and I don't really feel any particular sense of needing to marry these people. But it was like, but then again, at the same time, I started thinking, oh, is there something wrong with me? And then I was like, wait, is there something wrong with me in the fact that why do I keep finding girls who are okay with sexuality? Is that wrong? Like, are we all wrong? Is there something really horrible going on?
What if you're a changeling?
Right. Well, like you just don't know, right? But yeah, I was raised to think the same way, that it was women were not allowed to be sexual creatures when we were growing up. And I had a lot of cognitive dissonance around that. And now I just realize women are way worse.
Rude.
Nowadays, definitely.
What the fuck?
No. I'm just saying this to get a response out of Ashley.
It's
Actually.
not a bad thing.
Your face, Ash.
Honestly, I will say what I mean by that is actually that I hear more sexually explicit discussions from women I know than men. Like, I don't have those discussions with men. I just don't.
Yes.
That's just not things we talk about. We don't do locker room talk.
No.
That's because women are more talkers, right, Kevin? Is that what you said?
Mhm.
We like to talk more.
Yes.
I love to talk. I don't know. No, I don't know about that. I think honestly, it's kind of cool. Maybe what is actually referenced, is happening with that is that it's now okay.
I think it's always been more assumed that women are allowed to express their feelings. With the current embracing age of sexuality, female sexuality and empowerment, it's just being funneled through that same thing.
And I'm
like
all
we've
for
always
it, by the way. So
we've always been taught, talk about your feelings, and it's like, okay, sex is cool to talk about. Like we're allowed to have, not that we needed the permission, but now that sexual empowerment for females is present. Well, guess what? We're going to talk about that too.
Well, and when it's culturally okay too, and I think there's really strong that it's culturally okay. I think that's a really valuable thing.
Well, and you have hybridization of culture. So for me, I come from a Texas Mexican culture, and they are very traditional. And so in that Hispanic heritage, like, you're expected to take care of your husband and fulfill his sexual needs. And if he strays, it's because you weren't taking care of him. But then you have that going directly against what's now being kind of spread throughout our own Western culture of, hey, yo, women's sexual empowerment. And I was fortunate enough that my mom was completely different than the rest of what was present at that time where we were growing up. So for her, she was very the opposite. She was like the embodiment of Lilith. Of, you don't exist to serve any man, and you are fine, being a sexual being. And she was very pro positive sexuality. She didn't want us having sex as kids. She didn't want us, teenagers pregnant, dropping out of school, but she encouraged us in our sexuality as women. And she still does. Like, she's still very positive when it comes to sexuality. And I appreciate that with her. And In any way, though, it's embracing any of the sexuality. Like, hey, you want to go experiment? Go experiment. It doesn't have to be just a man or just anything specific. And so I don't know. I felt like I was fortunate to have a good and strong positive role model when it came to that. So I wouldn't feel shamed when it came to sexuality.
That's awesome.
Unfortunately, I did carry a lot of shame sexuality wise, but that wasn't from her.
Is it funny how we do that, by the way? I was thinking about this the other day, why we all carry so much shame around sexuality. Like, I remember being young, and I think this is all tied directly to the Incubi and Succubi thing. I don't think we're going off on a weird tangent.
Mhm.
But I remember being young and being embarrassed. Like, I mean, I'm talking like 6 years old, 7 years old, being embarrassed if I saw people kissing in a movie or something. Like, I'd get up and walk out because it would like embarrass me. It wasn't that if I was watching it alone, I was fine. But if there were other people, especially my parents or adults, I would feel really self-conscious. Did you guys? Was this just me? Am I the freak, or did other people have this too? Don't leave me hanging here.
Yep, I'm the same way. I still kind of am sometimes. Yeah.
That's interesting, right? Like, but yet it's how we all got here.
If I could add that to like even a small innocence to it too. Like, how many times do you kids see their parents kiss and go, "Ew, gross"? Like, if you're gonna do that, do it away from me. It's like your parents are just kissing and showing the affection their affection for each other. Like, what's wrong with that? Like, why is that bad? Like, let them kiss, let them hug, let them
Let me have my marriage.
let them have that marriage. Well, I was thinking about something like with Lilith, and do you think, from a lore aspect, the reason that she's tied to the succubus sexual demon avenue, if you will, do you think that was done intentionally to add to the shaming and don't do this, don't have sex?
I think it depends on the religion, because her story is not very well known in the most modern Christian forms. Like, you don't go to Bible school in Southern Baptist or, non-denominational Christian and know who Lilith is. Most people, if you ask who's Lilith, either they know about it from pop culture,
Sure.
or they know about it from just because it's starting to become more of a mainstream concept. But if you ask most people, who's Lilith? They're like, I don't know. But if you ask, who's Eve?
Yeah.
They know.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it was necessarily, I don't think she was, if she's mythological, I don't think she was created as a story to shame, at least in certain bloodlines of religion. Now, whether that's different in other, because I know she's a little bit more present in like the Jewish readings and scriptures, isn't she, Michael? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. So I think one thing we can't overestimate when we're talking about something like this, especially from a Christianity Catholic background, is that Catholics are really good at taking other stories from other cultures and then turning them into their own narrative, right? So they're like no pun intended, but they're literally like the Roman Empire Part 2. They would just take whatever worked and like make it work, right? Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, so looking at, when we see that Lilith showed up in stories from Mesopotamia, right? First of all, that predates Christianity. It doesn't predate Judaism, but we start seeing, what is it, in the Talmud back in the 3rd century AD, which is still is before the Bible was compiled the way it is now. Lilith was being mentioned in the Talmud, which is the kind of the Jewish, the book more about like living, like the way of life, how to actually live according to all of this. So in the Talmud, 3rd century, I think right around the time is where it starts to show up in what's considered kind of religious texts and stuff that's still held. It seems to me that maybe it's not the legend itself, or the idea of Lilith is Ashley saying, is maybe not necessarily there for the shaming side of it. I think it's absolutely been used for that.
Sure.
And but I think what we're talking about is the woman being able to be self-empowered, to choose their own sexuality, to engage in that. And then that becomes part of that archetype of the succubi as well, where they're in control, right? And let's be honest, guys, like if you really, not that we want to do it, but if you look back, you can go, well, I don't think it was the right response. I can see why men were trying to keep women under control, because they're scary as hell. Most of the time they're smarter than us. And I think it's good that we're able to embrace this and actually have like a human equal conversation, but you can look back and go, it's really not a good way to handle it. But there there were so many societal constructs to try to keep women in a box.
Well, and you can take the story of Lilith and just to succubi in general as like, this is our warning of female sexual empowerment, or it just being demonized. Like female sexual empowerment is being demonized. And then you segue into the sirens who are luring men in with their sexuality. And I feel like it's almost a warning to men. If you follow your sexual drive willy-nilly without really having any cause for the course, but you just give into your pure sexuality, well, you're going to die. They're going to lure you in and kill you.
or you're going to die in some way. And I mean, I've definitely experienced siren-like situations. And by the way, when I can say that, like, I'm not even saying that the person themselves are that thing only. It just meant the interaction, the relationship we had was 100% that. And I think
You're welcome.
But like going into that kind of thing, going into looking even at the Odyssey, like there's so many times where the different places that Odysseus and his crew go to and the things they deal with are mirrored in life. And by the way, I feel like women could turn that around and be like, well, okay, well then men are the sirens, like in this particular case. Like you could just flip the genders, it would still make sense. But I mean, I've been pulled off my path by sirens before.
Well, pre-5th century, I mean, there were stories, depictions of male sirens. But after 5th century is when it kind of switched purely to like the female sirens being the dominant appearance in art and literature. And I actually think there are in Brazil, if I recall correctly, there's still stories of male sirens at rivers. So not even like the ocean or the seas and rivers that drown women. So they're still kind of present depending where you look culturally even now, but predominantly it's the female sirens. To me, it almost feels like sirens, male or female, are like Friday the 13th movies. It's a warning against sexuality. Don't have sex, kids. Don't go into the woods or you're going to be murdered. And that's just what that feels like. They're just warning stories to not give into your sexuality.
Well, it reminds me too of, and I think the other side of this too is the idea when we're talking about incubi, succubi as well, is this idea of terror and sleep, right? And the vulnerability. Now, the thing is, if you listen to lullabies, which are so interesting, looking at lullabies across cultures through the centuries, there's always this little element of like malevolent terror or horror in some of these things, right? You listen to me like, why would you have that in a kid's song? Like, what is that? But then you realize like, oh, there is something really tied to horror, terror, sleep.
It's warnings.
I think that's a pretty interesting thing that I hadn't even considered until you were talking about that there, Ashley. But I think sexuality also, and to be fair, without being cautious in sexuality, you can have some problems. Like let's be honest, let's be straight up, right? Like you could, like if I could have walked into a situation where I follow some like metaphorical like sirens thing, and the next thing I know, I'm working a corporate job and I'm unhappily married for the rest of my life. And yet the rest of me has not gone out into the world and gone on the path I wanted to go on, and it hasn't done any of those things, right? So there are times where I have to sit there and look at this and be like, this has to end. Like I have to cut this off. I have to go the other direction. I have to ignore the call of this person or of this attraction or whatever. And let's not forget, there's also Circe, the witch that Odysseus meets, and just I think he impregnates her. She turns all of his crew into pigs, and then he just hangs out for 10 years. Like it just has a 10-year relationship with her. And then goes back to his wife because he's such a cool guy. But let's not forget, there's the island of the lotus eaters, distracted by pleasures, just completely distracted, and all of your time goes away. There's so many of these things that show up in our everyday lives, including the sirens, including even the idea of an incubi and succubi in people that we know. It might not be in the middle of the night, although that could happen. That's pretty horrifying.
And I don't think the call of the siren is necessarily meant to be taken in literal either. Similar to what you just said, there's a person pulling at you, but that means a death of part of yourself, if not most of yourself over time. And similar to your point, it's like a lullaby warning you that you may be willing to throw it all out of the way to follow this pull. But sometimes I wonder if that's just a person manifestation or if that can mean other calls as well, other destructive things that can consume you and become the death of you, or at least the healthy you that you know, whether it be addiction or something that becomes completely destructive, that it's an alluring call that pulls you in. And this is that warning, like, don't listen to that siren call because it could be the end of you.
Totally true. I completely buy that. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. A lot of what's been said reminds me of muses as well.
Right.
Do you think that the two are interchangeable?
So it's interesting because like I instantly have a reaction, but then I realize the fallacy where it comes in talking about incubi and succubi. But I think for me, like the siren is something that's pulling you into something to take from you. It somehow takes your life force, takes your time, takes your attention, takes whatever. Whereas a muse is there inspiring you to create and to put into the world, right? So you're being inspired to give as opposed to it taking.
Sure.
So that right there, I think, is a pretty powerful lesson in life. When you think about it, when you start living from a place of what can I give as opposed to what do I get, life drastically changes for you, right? I think it's really valuable. But then at the same time, I'm aware of the fallacy of talking about that. I can't really tie it to the incubi and succubi because what incubi can actually impregnate one of their victims, right? Now, depending on how they get there, that's a different story. But like, so I think the metaphor might kind of fall apart there. But I think that's a really good question. I hadn't thought about that until just now.
Well, I think too, piggybacking off of what you said, the siren is pulling you off your path. So it's literally steering you off your course. Whereas I feel like a muse is inspiring you, like Michael said, to be boosted on your course.
Yeah.
And I think that translates to the incubi and the succubi as well with the sirens, because they're pulling you off whatever course you think is meant for you. Whether it's sex shaming or not, you're on a specific course in your mind. Otherwise, it wouldn't be considered bad, right? You'd be like, heck yeah, that was an awesome sex dream. But something about it was negative and left you feeling negative. So it's pulling you off whatever in your mind was meant to be your course, whether it be chastity or that sexuality of repression. So it's still pulling you away from whatever it is you feel your path is. Now, maybe you need a little bit of sexual liberation. I don't know. But whether it is, I don't know, because I don't think incubi and succubi are necessarily bad by nature. But that's me because I'm a little off. I'm a little weird. So if you go by the literal, they're taking your soul for good sex. Little pieces of your soul every time you have phenomenal sex.
Technically, I'm already giving that up, really. I mean,
I'll sign up.
But we haven't even talked about what they say sex with the succubi and incubi are like. They describe the incubi as having like an ice cold penis. I'm not sure I want an ice cube inside of me, like thrusting. That's just not something I think I'd feel okay with. For the succubi, it's like an ice cavern that you're entering. So I think it really depends on what scenario we're talking about.
Well, I don't know if we've solved anything here.
I think they're real.
I'll sign up. Oh, for science.
For science, you're going to go
For science.
summon some. You can find things on Etsy to draw them
You
in.
can. You can.
I was going to say, actually doing research, I found people who have spells and other things, so you can actually bring a specific one to you.
It's funny. I didn't believe in any of that. It's like magic, whatever. And I was about 17 years old. I just played a show and I had a fan bring me and I was naive, bringing me like this little bag of just like, it seems like potpourri or something like that, and a candle. And she's like, I just wanted to give this to you as a gift. So I, later on, I'm like, oh, cool. I'll just light the candle, whatever. So I light the candle and I get unnaturally tired for 2 hours, out of nowhere. I was like, I was fighting it. I was like, I cannot sleep right now. And I refused. I fought it for 2 hours and then it just vanished, went away. And I was like, what the hell just happened? And I was talking to a friend of mine and she's like, no, that's a love spell. You're supposed to fall asleep and dream of her. And this thing's supposed to lock in. It was just so, I can't describe it except it just seemed so unnatural. I was not tired and I just got hit by this massive wave and then it dissipated. Since then I was like, I'm not going to go too far into letting myself believe in that too much, although I will allow for it, but I definitely have respect.
There is a show I used to watch called Blood Ties. I think it only had 1 or 2 seasons. And the vampire has a witch who's in love with him. And she gives him something similar to that, a satchel. And he doesn't realize she has spelled it. So he goes home and it knocks him out. And so when he wakes up, she's actually in his apartment. She has tied him to his bed. And she's like going to do all sorts of spells to bind him to her. And it's just like, holy moly. That just reminded me of that. Like, good thing you didn't fall asleep. You would have woken up, tied to your bed.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah, except you would be bound to somebody. Yeah, Kevin's like, welcome to the BDSM club.
Right.
Well, hey, we're talking about Incubi and Succubi. I feel like that's not that far away.
How can you not? And I feel like a
Right.
lot of these are probably rooted in there somewhere. People have fetishes that they repress and stay unexplored, aggressive fetishes, primal fetishes, bondage fetishes, and that manifests when they're asleep because you can't repress it any further. You can't push it down when you're asleep. So it comes up. And I feel like that's what they dream about. They dream about those things that maybe at their base desire, they crave a little bit of.
Oh, deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Hell, I'll go on the limb and I'll admit it. Like, there's things that I was brought up to be ashamed of, and I would have dreams about it, keep it to myself.
I have friends even now that they're starting to explore those worlds and they're fighting through what they were taught was bad, and they're fighting through those expectations and societal pressures. Now, I'm actually happy. Like, first of all, fuck 50 Shades of Grey, because totally
Reach.
just no. But with that said, other shows out there are starting to introduce the fetish world in a healthy way. And it's not just the sex. What was it? The Taxi Cab Diaries, and that used to show like on HBO where they talk about fetishes.
Taxi Cab Confessions.
Yeah, that. See, like you could tell what I've watched.
Yeah, sadly I watched it.
But it's now becoming more acceptable to discuss, and there are more avenues for people to explore that. But it'd be interesting to see if, as sexuality becomes empowered and as the fetish world becomes a bit more normalized, if the numbers of succubi and incubi reports decrease.
It will be interesting to see, and I think each of us too have our own individual kind of journey through consciousness into sexuality, right? Like, and it's different for everyone. But it's almost like you could look back at the Middle Ages and then look at someone being raised in somewhat of a religious kind of context. In a way, the way we evolve in our sexuality almost mirrors the way the human race evolved in their sexuality from like Christianity up through Catholicism into the Renaissance into the modern era. Like it's almost could have mimicked the same way. I think, and I agree with you about the 50 Shades of Grey thing. Like it really painted such an unfair, unhealthy view of that world. But it's amazing. Like when you realize that is the second most read book in the English language apart from the Bible.
Tells you more people are interested in than they admit.
Oh, it's such a big thing. Like it's such a big thing weighing on the consciousness of people. And also, can I say how screwed up it is that like male sexuality is completely pushed out of any place where there's family stuff. And fair enough, because like I wouldn't want to go buy anything like sexual like with like in a Walmart, right? But at the same time, there was no joke an entire wall of 50 Shades of Grey books in Walmart for sale back in the day. And I'm like, all right, fine, whatever.
I'm going to argue with that because you can find the hardware section at any Walmart.
Ha ha ha.
Fair enough.
I'm going to argue with that also. It is absolutely geared towards male sexuality dominance at Walmart, at Walgreens, at Target, at anything. You will find rows and rows and rows and rows of condoms in flavors, different thinness types, and different lubrications and material types. How easy is it to find female condoms?
True.
How easy is it to find dental dam or anything like that?
Good point.
It is.
Yeah, no, that's a really fair point. Like I hadn't even considered that. That's a good point. Really. Yeah. It's interesting to see how those things separate out. But I do think so, like really quickly with the 50 Shades of Grey thing, like I think that really showed a lot of the underpinnings of what is going on sexually for a lot of people. And I think that has a lot to do with the incubi and succubi kind of idea persisting for so long and being such a big part of many cultures.
See, and my mom, back when I was younger, she read a book called Incubi by Edward Lee. And it's about a sex demon. It's probably a dirty book. I didn't read it, but just seeing the cover page all the time, or the cover title, I can't even think. Seeing the cover art consistently, I was very intrigued by that. So as I got older and, the internet became a thing, I was naturally curious and started looking into these things. What is an incubus? What is a succubus? Where do they come from? So I have had an unnaturally unhealthy, probably interest in things I probably shouldn't have at a young age, but there I was, a teenager researching these things, and there wasn't much out there back then. But I really think over the decades, yeah, I'm aging myself here. Over the decades, I really do think that often a lot of these are really just manifestations of people's sexuality. I feel like the more it's repressed and the more it's suppressed within the individual, the more they experience occurrences like this. And it's a negative connotation and association they've created in their mind, and it's manifesting out. So when they feel these things, sexuality is not inherently bad, right, or evil, but because they have been shamed so much, maybe not even externally, maybe it's just an internal shame that they have kind of created in themselves, so that when it does manifest, those feelings come along with it. And because you're asleep, when you feel certain things, your mind is giving visualizations to those feelings. So maybe you are seeing the demons. Maybe you are seeing the monsters. I don't know, but I do think it has a lot to do with suppression of sexuality, just coming out while you're asleep.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, think about it. Vampirism, right? We see so many people, and women as well, being so enticed by the idea of vampirism, right? Or a vampire. It's in a very seductive sense. It's funny how all of these forms of seduction that happen to these women are forced from some demonic being, and they're not going to enjoy it. They shouldn't enjoy it because it's horrible.
I don't know what vampire you're meeting, but
But you know what I'm saying, right? You know what I mean? It's like it's all there to like try to convince you that it's like not okay, and if it happens, it's just the devil trying to take your soul. So just like run away.
I think it's a primal aggression that people crave, whether it be from a female or a male or non-binary. It's a demon creature. I think people are at a base level craving some kind of primal aggression, and it just manifests out.
Yeah,
I'm not opposed.
Mm-mm.
I will say, for me personally, primal aggression from a woman creeps me the fuck out, because I instantly feel like there's some other game going on. Like I feel like I'm going to be killed or something. But that's just my take on it. That's how I feel, right? But I'm just recognizing it in myself as I'm talking about it right now. Like I'm not enticed about the idea of waking up and having someone trying to suck my blood while I'm sleeping. Like that's not cool by me.
She's sucking your soul, not your blood.
Oh, well, in that case.
I say bring it on.
If there's a succubi, she can suck me dry.
How long have you been waiting to say that?
I've been waiting for the right moment. Like that. This has been just
All
killing
night.
me.
I knew he was waiting for it. I could tell. You were just like,
He did warn us.
he did. He warned us at the beginning of the evening.
Say the moment you started saying that, I instantly knew how that phrase was going to end.
He knows us. He's only spent like an hour and a half with us. He already knows us.
Right.
We are out of control. I like, though, that they don't, like with the vampires, they try to glamorize them. They're beautiful, they're ageless, they're timeless, they're seductive, they're everything you wish you could have and be. And I love that the incubi and the succubi are not. They are demon creatures. Nobody's ever described them as being alluring and beautiful. They have this energy that's charismatic and seduces you. Like you're terrifying, but I'm seduced. Like there's something seductive about them, even if it's just their energy, because I doubt it's their ice cold penis. But with that said,
There should be a t-shirt.
with that said, though, they're not described as being attractive at all. I mean, most of them are described as having like bird bodies with like claws and tails. And I know Lilith especially is associated with like claw feet and owls. And again, why are people manifesting these creatures?
I don't know. The Lilith thing just sounds like a guy describing what he calls his psycho ex.
Like if you go to metaphysical shops, a lot of the sculptures out there of Lilith, like she's just rock star from the torso up, but then her legs like evolve into these huge gnarly talons, and she's got like owls at her feet, and it's just like, where'd they pull that out of their minds? Because this is like, to the point we discussed earlier, these cultures around the world associate these demons with like bird-like features, the talons and the claws, and it's like interesting.
Well, even the one of the original, potentially, I think one of the root words for Lilith is nightbird. I wonder if that's part of it. I think the owl thing is interesting, and in a way, it almost reminds me of Artemis. Yeah, I don't know.
You know, it's interesting in the Hispanic culture, owls are associated with death. So, like, my grandma is super terrified of owls. And so I feel like there's something there. You have Lilith, who is associated with owls. And then in some cultures, owls are associated as like a death figure. So,
And on the flip side, other cultures, owls are a sign of wisdom.
True.
she's a wise old broad
That'll bring you death.
in the funnest way possible.
About little deaths in a very icy way.
Yes, many in a very icy way.
Yeah, can we just talk about it for a moment? We're talking about the icy thing. So this is an issue right here. So I'll just bring this up in the Seinfeld reference with George Costanza. I was in the pool. How does that work? Maintaining an erection during an icy, yeah.
But ice is solid and hard.
Not icy hot. Maybe it's so hot it's cold.
It's icy hot. It's essentially the. I mean, it seems like trying to reach climax by fucking a snowman, and I just don't see that working.
But maybe it's part of the energy, the demon energy. It's going to pull that out of you by force, regardless. Men can be raped too. So,
oh, absolutely.
Maybe that's like part of that context is it's by force. I don't know. Okay, so does anyone have any last thoughts? I want to hear from you first, John Thomas.
I don't have any last thoughts.
Yes, you do.
No, I really don't.
Have you ever had an experience with an incubus or a succubus?
No, I have not. But I'm not going to lie, seeing the spells and everything kind of makes me want to try it.
Okay, so that's your homework. Try summoning one, and then...
Why do I always have to get the homework?
Because you're the one who said you're interested. I didn't hear anybody else say they were intrigued to do it.
Kevin hasn't talked yet.
I do.
But he does chicken out of spells.
Kevin wouldn't even try a simple fucking love spell. I'm not going to put it on him to summon a demon into his bedroom.
I backed out a love spell because we were talking.
Who do you think's going to show up for Kevin? An incubus or a succubus?
Both. They'll be like, "What the fuck are you doing here? What the fuck are you doing here?"
Like,
I was actually going to be really, really rude and say his ex-wife, but that gets edited out.
I'm leaving that in.
Score. She's not going to listen to it. Who cares? You know you were going to say it eventually.
no, I wasn't.
Liar.
All joking aside, if we're thinking about like attaching that to life in some respect, at least in my mind, the succubus has to be the one who's kind of like initiating or at least trying to draw that out of, right? So it has to be someone who's kind of probably in a very unhealthy way coming after you, right? I mean, I've definitely had my share of that. I've had a few people do that.
But if we're going with sirens that are a branch of succubi, and sirens are alluring, and you have this idea of changelings, which are like they're half breeds, isn't it possible to for a person to have a natural alluring quality to them?
100%.
So they may not be doing the assertive pulling, but when you do interact with them, boy, is it a hell of a time.
So yes, I think that is very real.
So nobody answered though. Has anybody had an actual experience with a succubi or an incubi?
I haven't had the sexual side of it, but I have had the feeling of waking up and having somebody sitting on me, sitting on my chest, sitting on my back. So while it's not an incubi or a succubi experience, it is very close to what a lot of people describe in some respect, just without the rest of it.
Okay.
That's the closest I've come.
It's the same for me. It was when I was probably like 15 or 16, and it's only happened once. But yeah, I've had that same experience.
Kevin?
I mean, I've had dirty dreams, like whatever.
We've all had dirty dreams, Kevin.
So, like, is a dirty dream always going to be a succubus, or is it not?
But it's what you saw during the dirty dream. It's like I said, as they described.
Yeah.
Oh, then no.
Ashley.
I plead the fifth.
We deplete the bitch.
Well, no, I've never had a direct dream of having sex with a demon, but I have had lucid dreams where I do have creatures appear and it does feel like they are trying to be seductive towards me or they are trying to influence me almost in a romantic way, though. Like I can feel the attempt to romance me, but there's something underlying. So it's not a genuine romance, if that makes sense. Like here, I'm giving you glamour of what you want, what you crave, what you need, but there's something else behind there waiting to pounce. And these tend to be lucid dreams because that's something I do. So I kind of change my dream. What's interesting is a few of those occasions where I have like forced my mind to switch dreams or switch, locations if I can't make myself wake up. Sometimes those presences will follow me into the next dreams. And I'm like, all right, motherfucker, I have jumped 5 times. Leave me alone. No means no. So 99% probably just a mental manifestation, but sometimes it's a little unclear, especially confusing when I am actively lucid dreaming. Because it's like, hey, I'm controlling this. Why are you reappearing? Go away. But I don't know.
That's interesting. That's cool. I'm going to be thinking about it.
Yeah, it's only happened a few times though. And I will say this, because I am actively pushing back on whatever this is in my dream and I'm dream jumping quite a few times, I will wake up the next morning with just like an awful migraine. And it felt like I did not sleep at all. And so who knows what that is. With that said, Michael, we appreciate you coming onto the show today. Would you like to tell us about any projects you may have coming up or anything you're excited about being a part of?
I'm excited about everything. Now, there's a company called Creature and Ghost that's been formed, but it'll be officially launched in 2021, but it's been going on for a while. And we are dedicating ourselves fully into fictional podcast production. And we think this is really the right move. And so we're going to be creating multiple different fictional series, different characters, and just having a lot of fun in that space. So that's the thing I'm really excited about right now. And of course, there's a lot of other music. I have several books coming out here in the next few months. So if you want to look me up, it's michaelamidei.com. Just Michael, Michael, Amidei.com.
Thanks. Well, we'll keep an eye out for your future projects. We're excited to see what you have coming down the pipeline. You did a great job being our guest today. So thank you so much for taking time out of your week to come and talk to us. I know we're kind of crazy. So thank you. I had a blast with you being here.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I had a great time. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning into 3Haunted Podcast with your host. I'm John Thomas.
I'm Kevin K. Daddy.
And I'm Succubi Witch Ashley.
If you have any questions, comments, or concerns at this point, email us at 3hauntedpodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so already, please follow us on all of our social media. Hit that follow button.
Are you looking for more awesome podcasts? Head on over to withoutyourhead.com for access to the Without Your Head podcast network, where you'll find a variety of podcasts sure to keep you entertained and coming back for more.